Hey there, cats and kiddies. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live talking about Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. And this is going to be a spoilery discussion. I'm going to be talking about things that happened in the movie, things that were the most resounding to me, and, such like that, in very spoilery, explicit fashion. If you wanted a video that was non-spoilery, what I will say from right out of the gate, as a sort of non-spoilery estimation of the film, is I had a thorough blast watching this movie. It was a roller coaster ride of emotions, twists and turns, shocks, surprises. I left this sucker stunned, and it took me several hours of mulling it over and processing it, thinking about it and such like that, jotting down some notes, which I will be referring to in this video in the spoilery part of the discussion. It was just a rollicking, amazing, awesome sauce time, and I couldn't more highly recommend it. The sort of, minor gripes that I have with the film are far outweighed by everything else that was amazing and exhilarating and such like that. Again, I couldn't more highly recommend going and seeing it at the drop of a hat as soon as humanly possible if you haven't already. And but from this point on, I will be discussing the film with spoilers, explicit spoilers. Here is your warning, your first, last, and final warning to click off the video. Otherwise, you'll be sticking with me, and let's rock and roll. Now, as I said, I wrote down a sheet of notes because there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about in this film, and mostly it's going to be under the format of the things that stuck with me hours on after having watched the movie. Like when I sat and I thought, these are the things, these are the big set pieces that they were seared into my mind, into my brain, and I will not soon forget them. The emotional impact, the surprise, the weightiness of these things. And the first one that I have, actually referencing my notes, comes somewhat early into the film. It is the seeming death of General Leia. And I was immediately reminded, shortly after watching the movie, of how much this kind of has a similar framework to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where you open the film and you see the entire bridge crew seemingly slaughtered by Klingons, this battle that is ensuing, and it turns out to all be a simulation. Well, very similarly so. And then toward the end of the movie, you have Spock actually legitimately dying, sacrificing himself for the sake of the Enterprise and such like that. And but similarly so in this movie, you begin very early on in the movie, you seemingly lose someone who is, paramount to the entirety of the saga. And then by the end, there is the other leg that drops by the end of the film where you actually have a legitimate loss along similar lines. And I remember, you see Kylo bearing down on the ship that is, where Leia is, with the Resistance, and she senses him, he senses her, and he hesitates. And then a couple other TIE fighters make the shot. And the bridge where she is encapsulated just gets blown out into space. And we find out Akbar actually perishes during that sequence, which kind of sucks. But Leia was the most impactful thing. I my heart skipped a beat. I clasped my chest, and I'm like, did I just see this? Is that it? Is she gone? Like, I didn't know it. I hadn't heard anything from anyone else. I had, tried to avoid as much as I could as far as information goes about this movie, spoilers and everything like that. I tried to stay as spoiler-free as possible, so I was just gobsmacked. I was stunned, thunderstruck, when suddenly she's pulled out into space. And, I couldn't focus for a couple of seconds. I'm like, what? The movie's still going, the action is still going, the pace is still going. And I'm thinking how it's only just shy of a year ago that we lost Carrie Fisher. And all of that mourning and remorsefulness came flooding back, and I'm like, oh my God, they killed her off already? But then no. This is why I make the allusion to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, because you get the estimation, the entire bridge crew got killed off in the opening of the movie. But they weren't actually. Well, here is Leia, and they close in on her. You see her fingers beginning to flutter, and her eyes pop back open, and she's alive. And through the power of the Force, she pulls herself, she summons herself back to the vessel where her life is saved. And it was like a relief and a shock. And I was just floored by that. It was like a punch to the gut. And of course, she isn't immediately healed. You know, she is knocked out for a time. And what I have next on my sheet of notes here, what follows that I found quite intriguing, is we always often see on the Empire side or the side of the First Order the infighting that's going on. There aren't, you know, much in the way of loyalties. It's about supremacy and all of that kind of stuff. Who wields the most power? Who's the most commanding and such like that. And so the infighting that results in Leia's temporary absence between Poe and between Holdo, Laura Dern's character, and such like that, they're both vying for control of the scenario where you have Hux and the First Order. They're following them per Snoke's order, per Kylo's order. You know, they're running low on fuel, and what are they going to do? They're sort of, you know, flapping their wings like, we don't know. You know, they all have their own estimations of what the next best course of action ought to be. And quite frankly, I didn't know whose side I was on. I was kind of like, as much as I like Poe and as much as I like Finn and his introduction to Rose, and they're coming up with this idea, oh, well, they're tracking us through light speed. It's the main ship. It's, you know, Snoke's main vessel. If we can sneak aboard it, we can shut that down and all that kind of stuff. Like, I was constantly thinking the whole time, like, I don't know if I'm siding with them necessarily. Maybe I want to hear what Holdo has to say, what her plans are, because I'm not sure they got the best idea in mind here, you know. And because, of course, Finn was trying to escape and Rose caught him and all this kind of stuff, we found out that her sister died in the opening battle of the film, thus giving her sort of the impetus, the driving force for what she's doing, trying to turn Finn in, and then they come up with this plan, as I say. And Poe, you know, the orchestration of that, having to sort of work behind the back of Holdo, who's trying to be the placeholder for Leia, it was just really intriguing to me, the infighting there, and how even within the Resistance, I mean, it's not like they have a whole hell of a lot of choice, but there aren't the loyalties as well. You know, everybody, they all want to do what they think is the best course of action, but that sees them pitting themselves against themselves, you know, each other. And so I just thought that was intriguing. It was something that was somewhat unexpected to me, because we're kind of used to just seeing everyone who's part of the Resistance or the Rebellion, they're all working together. You know, we got a lot more of a hint of the divisiveness in like Rogue One and somewhat in Rebels along those lines. And I liked seeing that carry over into this more modern estimation of Star Wars, where not everybody gets along. Not everybody just, you know, they lay out one idea, one, you know, mission statement, one plan of action, and everyone just goes along with it. Doesn't work that way. You know, especially with the absence, temporary though it may have been, of General Leia, who is this commanding force within the Resistance. Though I might add, it was again somewhat compelling by the end of the film when they're calling out for help and nobody comes. That was just gobsmacking to me. You know. But next on my list, I have the Force chats between Rey and Kylo Ren. Talk about intriguing characterization, evolution of characters. I mean, she goes from, you know, rage-fueled disdain for him to eventually evolving into sort of seeing his point of view. Because of the lack of, you know, once she has found Luke and his wanting nothing to do with her or anything else, he's gone to that island to die, which is a compelling, you know, character aspect to Luke Skywalker in and of itself. But it really, you know, I found myself wondering, are they doing the Solo twins? You know, I'm not even that familiar with the expanded universe, what is now known as Legends in Star Wars and everything like that, but I have a vague familiarity with the Solo family and, you know, the son and the daughter fighting and whatever like that. And I found myself wondering, is that what they're doing? Because, of course, they are bringing up Rey's parents again and things like that, and just the conversation where she wants to tear Kylo's head off from right off the bat. But then, as their discussions evolve, as they get to know each other, kind of, she's beginning to see, much as Luke did in Return of the Jedi, she's beginning to see a perceived delight, a perceived divisiveness of his own accord within him, you know, between the dark and the light and all that kind of stuff. And she feels like maybe she can save him, much in the same way as Luke tried to do. And eventually would succeed with his own father, Darth Vader, formerly Anakin Skywalker. And it was shocking and surprising. Of course, we find out that this was all orchestrated by Snoke, pointedly. It was his own Force abilities, his manipulation of the Force surrounding Kylo, making the bridge between them and everything like that, that allowed this to be. But it did have me really resoundingly curious, like, why is this happening? How is this happening? Are they really siblings? And I think even though by the end, Kylo, for all intents and purposes, says, well, your parents are nobodies, I think there's still room for debate. I'm still waiting for the other leg to drop that, oh, there actually is some more to it. But on the topic of Rey's parents being nobodies, I'm not really, upset by that. I kind of feel like it's complementary to where the film is left by the end. If, as we follow Finn and Rose going to Canto Bight, this big sort of, Vegas planet and whatever like that. I felt like a lot of that stuff could have been probably condensed down. It didn't have to be as lengthy as it was. Their little misadventure with the DJ character, Benicio del Toro's, so-called hackers, slicer, whatever they called him. I felt that whole segment of the film could have been condensed down considerably, probably. But the children they meet, these force-wielding, children who don't seemingly, they seem to be orphaned and they seem to be slaves. And we see by the end, the final cap of the movie, the final scene, shows one of these children being a force manipulator, force wielder. And so I kind of feel like the fact that Kylo puts forth this idea that Rey's parents were nobodies, they just wanted to get rid of her. They just wanted to sell her off for, alcohol or whatever it was, into slavery or indentured servitude or whatever. It's kind of complimentary that, because it seems like that's the next phase of the saga, is more of a balancing between the light and the dark sides of the Force. The balance being the Force is reaching more people, whereas it always seemed contained down to the Skywalker family and certain, Jedi, Sith, and whatever like that. It always felt very inclusive to just the small amount of characters we're following. Well, the idea that this child has it, and maybe other children like him all across the galaxy, known and unknown, beyond the Outer Rim and whatever like that, it seems complimentary to then say, well, one of our main characters comes from the same humble, unknown origins, and the Force, in answer to a character like Snoke, who is a dark Force wielder and evil, and like Kylo and everything like that, to balance that out, the Force is seeking, beings through which to conduct itself on the lighter side, to balance it out. But it's gonna permeate and go beyond just the light and the dark, because it's gonna be more accessible to more beings, maybe. It's the evolution of the Force as a concept and as a thing, as a tangible. I know that kind of makes no sense, but as as an energy, as a thing, it's growing beyond what our own known concept of it has been since the original trilogy, and I think that's interesting. So I don't have much of a problem with her parents being unknowns, rather than, oh, her father or grandfather was Obi-Wan Kenobi or something like that. It's not really necessary. Now, on the topic of Snoke himself, that's the next thing I have on my list, the death of Snoke, which was one hell of another gut-busting, smack upside the head, table-flipping shock and surprise, because of not only who does it, but the fact that it happens at all. And this is one of the biggest points in the movie that is the closest I get to a genuine grievance with the film. Because I wanted to know who the hell Snoke is. Who is this guy? What are his origins? Where did he come from? There were lots and lots of discussions and speculations. Is he Darth Plagueis? Is he this character, that character? Does he hail from this world, that world? This aspect of Legends, or the former expanded universe and everything like that. And I was always curious to find out if there was more to it. And in this moment, as compelling as it was to see Kylo, sort of bend Snoke's impression, his mental impression, his Force impression on Kylo's own mind back in on itself, so that he's wielding his, lightsaber, but he's twisting Rey's, which is sitting right next to Snoke, and this is what cuts him in half. I was gobsmacked by that. It was the last thing I would have ever expected, but I felt, both elated and shocked and surprised, but alongside that I felt like almost disgruntled and dissatisfied. I was like, but wait, what? I want to know who he is. We're not going to find out now? He's just gone? He was here and now he's gone? And the thing about it is, I might not have had such a resounding distaste for it in the moment to coincide with the shock and the awe and the, loving every minute of it, were it not for the fact that Kylo himself, and by extension Rian Johnson and the story group and whatever like that who put this story together, are banging it over the head. The impression that you must bury the past. You must cut yourself off from the past. Stop holding on to the past. Past, bad. Okay, we get it. But you know what would have been a lot more effective? Instead of telling us, forget about it, stop dwelling on it, stop seeking answers, stop trying to fill in plot holes, stop trying to make sense of it, as Kylo is trying to embed into Rey, and I think we, the audience, by extension, instead of that, give us one sentence of dialogue that tells us what Snoke's origins were. Pass it off as it's not that big a deal, but it'll be enough. It'll be a kernel enough to be like, oh, so that's where he came from. And then he's dead, like they don't give you anything and he's dead. So that was the one biggest, closest approximation of a gripe or a grievance I had with the film. It's just like, out of nowhere, he's gone. For 2 movies, for a movie and a half, I'm wondering, who is he? Where did he come from? How is he so powerful? How is he so familiar with Skywalker and all of that stuff? And we get nothing. Now, surely it's going to be stuff that is, filled in tie-in media, books, novelizations, video games, whatever like that, comics. But as much as I appreciate the multimedia aspect that Star Wars has become, much like my holdover grievances with The Force Awakens, there were things that were left unanswered in that movie that it's just swept under a rug. And then later, you have to go and get the books. Later, you have to go and read the comics if you want to understand it all. Phasma is a perfect example from The Force Awakens. Here, she, the impression everyone had going in was she's the next Boba Fett. She's going to be awesome sauce. And she's so easily dispatched, and it's like, what, WTF, what was that? And that's very much what the death of Snoke held for me in that moment. I was like exhilarated, but at the same time, I was like, okay, whoa. So we're not going to find anything out about this guy either. I want some answers. I don't want to have to go to other things. I'm watching a movie. If you go back to the original trilogy, they gave you enough information about everybody to gain your bearings. And that's all I want. I want to gain my bearings before somebody gets, dispatched, extinguished. And for me, Snoke was so easily taken out after we saw him treating Rey like a rag doll. Well, what's up with that? Where did that come from? And then, quick, no answers. So that kind of sucked. That moment. It was, and then the fight that follows, though, was spectacular. Kylo and Rey fighting off the red armored guards. I forget what they're called in The Last Jedi. But that was a spectacular fight. It was like I was on the edge of my seat watching that. And, I loved, it makes me think of earlier in the film when she's still with Luke. And he's questioning, what did you think was going to happen if you came and you found me? I'm just going to take my old laser sword and I'm going to go and confront the First Order singularly, and I'm just going to wipe the floor with them. Are you out of your mind? But I love that he said laser sword, because that's something that goes back to George Lucas. He would refer to them as laser swords rather than lightsabers, as they're more commonly known through the films. And And next in my list was Laura Dern's character Holdo's light speed sacrifice. Her arcing the Resistance ship back around and going to light speed and driving it right into Snoke's main vessel as Leia and Poe and all of them are trying to escape down to, I think it was Crate is the planet, the salt planet and whatever like that. And just the cinematography, the beats of that sequence were resounding, were unforgettable visually, and the scope of it. And I have heard some people saying, especially bearing in mind the loss of Carrie Fisher, would it not have even been that much more resounding were it Leia in that moment who made that sacrificial act? And I can see where they're coming from. I kind of agree with that. But at the same time, the original plan for this, what I remember them talking about shortly after the loss of Carrie Fisher, was that she was meant to have a big-time, significant presence in Episode 9. And I'm kind of with them on not wanting to change things around, manipulate a CGI representation of her character to have her go out in a blaze of glory. That was never actually the intention. Rather, did they keep the movie the way she signed on to it and she approved of it? And rather that they wouldn't change anything from how she, when she was participating, while she was still alive, while she was participating in. To go and change it in the aftermath, the wake of her unfortunate passing, I would not have been down for that. And so I can see where people are coming from if that had been Leia, and it would have been, more beneficial to have that be the case because she's no longer with us in the real world. I'm glad that they didn't. I'm glad that, it was the Holdo character and Leia survives by the end. I am wondering how they're going to deal with that come the next movie. I kind of hope that they don't really make much ado about it. I want there to be a mention. It's something they could put in the opening crawl, with the passing of General Leia, ... and the story continues. I don't want them to milk it, and I feel like it honors Carrie Fisher's memory to keep the movie as it was intended, rather than, throw a wrench in the works and retell the story with, Leia's passing when that wasn't the original intention, is what I'm getting at. But that whole sequence with Holdo going into light speed and crashing into Snoke's vessel and everything that happens out of that blew me out of the water, just sort of as a garnish to that, Finn going up against Phasma after the DJ character sells he and Rose out and everything. And as I say, I feel like that whole segment could have been cut down, could have been whittled down considerably. The misadventure that Finn and Rose are going on with the turncoat DJ and whatever like that. But the penultimate battle between Finn and Phasma I thought was pretty damned spectacular. I was a little disappointed that Phasma seems to have actually met her end so soon again. Another character just sort of, built up and built up and built up, and especially as I come to understand there's like a Phasma novel and comics and whatever like that, they really made her a resounding character and a badass, and they just kind of boom, 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 she fights with Finn, she's gone. There's another, I guess you could say, minor gripe. But I thought that fight between Finn and she, because she does hand him his ass, but then she gets distracted and he gets the leg up. When you think he's out for the count, he gets the leg up and he takes her down, and that was pretty spectacular. And next in my notes, I have the revelation of the Force Ghost of Yoda being really spectacular, coinciding with the dilemma that Luke is facing as Rey has gone off to confront Kylo and everything like that. And here Luke is harboring all of this, this curiosity and this protectiveness over the texts, the ancient Jedi texts and everything. And he's also, at the same time, he wants to burn it all down, but he doesn't have the courage to do it. And Yoda just comes in there and he's like, boom, I'll do it for you. Because it's nothing. It's meaningless. Life takes precedence, Stop focusing on what's over the next horizon. Think about right here and now. Think about what's going on in the people in your lives right here and now. And again, calling back to like Empire. That's the thing I loved about this movie. You had aspects of, people were really fearful with The Force Awakens, how it was such a semi-rehash of A New Hope. And so people were really trepidatious that this was going to be an out-and-out rehash of Empire. And what you really got, it felt like the second and third acts all wrapped into one. It felt like Empire Strikes Back and Jedi all wrapped into one. There were estimations of both all throughout this film, and it was that much more resounding to me for it. Falling on from there, in my list, is the tent pole to answer the seeming loss of Leia early on. It is Luke's force projection to Kylo, to the Resistance, or rather to the First Order, as the Resistance is cornered, and just spectacular was that. I thought it was interesting because there was a definite change in Luke's appearance. It's like, he got a haircut, he put on some Just for Men hair dye, and he looked different. I thought, okay, he cleaned himself up and he's going up against Kylo, pointedly. And I wondered what was up with it. And the resounding, reunification between he and Leia, siblings and whatever like that. And then his going out and pointedly confronting the First Order and Kylo. Man, just all kinds of epic badass. And Kylo orders them to fire everything they got onto him. And you have Luke, once the dust is settled, Luke is just, come on. And I laughed at that. I was like, this mother trucker, he is a badass. And but then, of course, once the other leg drops and you realize, oh, he's projecting himself, the sheer amount of ability, the strain and the strength it took brings about the end of Luke Skywalker. He arguably succumbs to the Force or releases himself peacefully, as Leia and Rey would both have the estimation of it. They could sense that he was at peace and he was happy because he had protected them. He had saved their lives. He bought time enough for their escape. And when he disappears, my breath caught in my throat again. And I'm sure I clasped my chest again, and I was fighting off tears. I was, he's looking off at the dual suns on the horizon, much as calling back on A New Hope, one of the most resounding moments in that movie. I'm getting choked up now. Because that character just is a true-blooded hero, like Superman and like Optimus Prime and like Captain James T. Kirk, all these, characters I grew up with. Luke is a character I grew up with, looking up to, admiring and aspiring toward, wanting and wishing and hoping to aspire toward being someone like him. And because life is the way it is, also sharing in that conflict as you grow older of feeling the darkness that surrounds us and the darkness within ourselves. And just, it was an amazing, amazing character arc within the film itself of where we find him at the beginning of this movie and the evolution of his character all the way through to the end. But also considering the character from when we first met him all the way up to now. Whew. You know what I'm saying? It was, I was just thunderstruck by it. Next on my list, I have the sacrificial act, that Finn attempts to make after he had tried to run. Arguably, he was trying to, ward off Rey and protect her and whatever like that. But Rose, had this high estimation of him based on what, she knew of him via her sister. She catches him trying to take off, tuck tail and run. And then here she is able to witness when the First Order's cannon is bearing down on the Resistance cave on Crate, where they're hiding out and they don't really have any way to escape. And he's going to crash pointedly right into it. And we're about to see the end of Finn, and I almost thought that we were going to. And then Rose comes in from the side, knocks him off, and they share a kiss. And I could almost hear fandom in the back of my mind, like, so soon? Really? Where did that come from? But you had every estimation of where that came from all throughout the film. She's fangirling over him from right out of the gate when she first encounters him, and then she realizes he's kind of a slouch. She's trying to make a run for it. But then he earns through the heroism of that act, he earns her respect anew, and the time they spent together, the moments they spent together. It's sort of a natural culmination, especially in the heat of the moment, what they're surrounded by. And so there's that kiss between them, and it was resounding to me. I thought it was adorable. I mean, Kelly Marie Tran's Rose is adorable anyway. But, how lucky Finn is to be answered with that. And then, of course, calling back on what I have already talked about a little bit in the video, the children of Canto Bight, they're Force wielders, and they, like Rey, they are, orphaned, they are without parents, but they have the hope of the Resistance. What that means, they have the estimation of that. And it just, it just seems to talk, or at least suggest to me, the evolution of the Force as a concept, as what we understand it to be. The Force is evolving as all life evolves. And it's spreading out and permeating that much further to include more. It's becoming all-encompassing, and more beings will resound out of that. And the idea, as the Star Wars channel Hello Greedo has talked about in many of his videos, the idea I like about that is that greatness does not always and only ever come from greatness. Even somebody who is a nobody can achieve, can do great things, can move mountains. And that's, at least, unless the other leg drops in episode 9, we find out, it was all a ruse, that Kylo was, passing over Rey, that your parents are nobodies. And she actually has, like Han and Leia were her parents, or Kenobi was her grandfather, or whatever like that. Unless we find that out, for all intents and purposes, she is a no one. And that's great, because she's somebody who came from nowhere. She's unexpected. She's not somebody anyone was expecting. And she's a force for good. She's a force for positive change. She is a herald. Without needing to have been born into it, without needing a lineage that is already, established. And that's really resounding. That's crazy, crazy compelling. And, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about the movie. One final note I will talk about is the humor in the movie. It seems a lot of the reviews I'm seeing, the most disparaging estimation they have of the movie, the biggest gripes they have, is the tone of the film. That the humor is there are one too many jokes, one too many punchlines. They keep going back to that humorous well. And there is a perceived lack in certain people of sincerity and such like that in the movie. And that's not anything that ever would have occurred to me. I did have one moment. I think it was the point in the movie when Rey has the Force chat with Kylo, and he's got his shirt off, and she says, do you need, can you put a towel on? Do you need to be there with your shirt off? And that was the one sort of joke that I kind of like, rather than just out and out laughing like all the other jokes in the movie. Actually, there were two that I didn't out and out laugh. That was one of them. The other one was the point where Chewie's eating what is probably a porg, and all the porgs are like, looking at him, and he's like growling at him and chasing him off. Both of those sort of punchlines, those jokes, I kind of felt like, okay, it wasn't that funny. Every other joke in the movie, though, every other quip, every other, bit of funny dialogue, I resoundingly laughed, and everyone in the theater resoundingly laughed, and it was exhilarating and fun, and it never would have occurred to me, this is too jokey. This is too much humor. This is too much snarkiness and quips and this, that, and the other thing, which is something I am hearing. I am hearing people disparaging it for the lightheartedness and the jokes, and that anytime it gets too deep, they react with a joke out of left field because they don't want to. They want the levity there. They don't want it to get too dark. And I guess I kind of see that to a point. I kind of see that argument to a point, but it was not something that occurred to me in the moment. I was watching the movie, and apart from those two humorous beats where I had reservations, like, it wasn't that funny. almost all the rest of the humor, all the rest of the lines, I mean, from Luke's debut, taking the lightsaber and flinging it over his shoulder, I laughed, you know? Anytime he like when he runs into R2 and he plays Leia's message from A New Hope, and he's like, oh, you know, he's ticked that R2 did that. He's like, a slick move or whatever he says. I laughed. Everyone laughed, and I was right there with them. And I do hear people saying, oh, there was maybe too much of that. Well, it wasn't to me. It was great to me. I had a thorough blast with it. I thought it was a clever mesh of the deep and the engrossing and you know, compelling, really just dark, permeating moments in the film, counterbalanced with the humor, the lightheartedness, and the adventure and the spectacle. I thought it was, that's why I equated to having felt like a roller coaster ride. You know, there were ups and downs and twists and turns, and it was like being on a ride at, okay, I guess it's fitting, at Walt Disney World, because Star Wars is now the Disney property. I didn't have a problem with it. I loved every dripping minute of the movie. The two big standout things, as I say, for me, was the dispatching of Snoke without any answer as to who he actually is. I want to know. I wanted to know, and he's just gone. So that was a disappointment. And then those two jokes, as I say, Chewie with the porgs and, you know, Kylo with his shirt off. They didn't resound to me as much as all the other bits and bobs of humor and the jokes and things like that had in the film. And so those are the only, that's the closest approximation I can get at the moment for gripes or grievances in the film. Everything else about it resounded. Everything else about it was just a grand spectacle, an amazing, amazing experience. And I can't wait to see it again at the earliest available opportunity. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you stuck with me for this grand, lengthy discussion of The Last Jedi, what your estimation of it was, love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. Love having that conversation, and I'd really be curious to hear what your own thoughts on the film were. If you just found it to be, you know, a fangasm from beginning to end, if you had, you know, complaints and gripes and grievances to do with it, if you thought it was the worst Star Wars movie out of the bunch, you know, let me know that. It's all about the topic of talk, having a great discussion, and Star Wars is something I'm very passionate about since my childhood, and I'm sure you are too, if you're watching this. And so yeah, let me know what you thought. Otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.